Postmodernists also argue that the blurring of the old class boundaries is due to the growth of consumer culture. Consumer culture makes it possible for individuals to pick and choose their own identities based around what they consume. Postmodernists argue that society is increasingly based on conspicuous consumption. By conspicuous consumption, we mean that people buy goods and show them off. Their consumption is made clear through the designer goods that they buy. Higher wages for many people means that they have more disposable income. They have more income that is available to buy goods. They buy into any lifestyle that they want. Leon suggested that the postmodern world is a consumer society. In the postmodern view, the expansion of popular culture results in a decline of traditional class cultures. So we started to look at this when we looked at popular culture, and we looked at Strinati's view on popular culture. So rather than the upper class buying into high culture and the working class buying into popular culture, those things have now become merged. The upper class buy into popular culture as popular culture has become more common or popular. The working classes are also able to buy into high culture. The working classes might have prints of Van Gogh in their home, or they might go to the Tate Modern art gallery. So there's a total mixing of cultures. Individuals pick and mix from other different styles, which may be traditionally associated with one distinct social class. Football is a good example here, and it's become a crucial part of popular culture, enjoyed by many in the UK, regardless of their class background. Now that we've looked at the different theories behind class, we'll now look at the working class, the middle class, and the upper class, how their identities used to be, and how they have changed. So, traditional working class identity includes the following features. So when we think about traditional working class identity, we're really going back to the 1970s and beyond. So in the past, the jobs that the working class had were based in manual and unskilled labour. For example, the shipbuilding or coal industries dominated the employment opportunities of many northern towns and cities, and for Grimsby, it was the fishing industry. There were traditional gender roles within the family. The male breadwinner who provided for the wife and children, and the female homemaker or the expressive role who cared for her husband and children. Boys were encouraged to follow in the father's footsteps. They often followed in the same employment pathways of the significant male role models in the families. For example, if your father was a miner, you would probably become a miner yourself. They would gain employment in the same factories, in the same industries. The communities were strong and had a feeling of unity, solidarity and togetherness. Working class communities were supportive and looked after their own kind. Outsiders were often distrusted. The communities were often strong because people often worked in the same area and lived in the same area, and therefore they mixed with their workmates. Politically, there was a strong link to the Labour Party, who was seen as the party that could fight for the working classes and could try and raise the living standards of the working classes. There was also strong loyalty to trade unions. Trade unions were seen as organisations that could protect their rights as workers. This meant that there was a mentality of us and them, us being the working class and them being the bosses. They took on values of immediate gratification. Immediate gratification means living for the moment, wanting pleasure in the here and now. This meant that the working classes were less likely to save money for the future, and possibly less likely to stay on at school because they wanted to live for the moment. Working class housing was based in cheaper and less desirable areas. Few of the working class would buy their properties, they would often rent, and some lived in houses around the factories that were owned by the government. There have been many changes to the working class during the last 20 years and more. These have resulted in changing cultures. So lives have become more privatised. Lives are based around the home now, and they're not really as community-centred as they were in the past. Employment is based on the service sector, often in office-based work rather than the manual sector. There's now more shared responsibilities between men and women in the household. There is increasing affluence or increasing wealth. Working class now have more money to spend, and they have a choice of consumer goods to spend it on. There's a rise in the number of homeowners and people who are socially mobile and aspirational. Working class people now own their own homes, they're less likely to rent, and they're more likely to try and move up the social classes. There's been a variety of reasons put forward for these changes, and these are fairly complex. They include some of the following. The decline of heavy industries such as coal, steel and shipbuilding, which has meant limited employment opportunities in working class areas. The decline of manufacturing industries in the UK, with work being shipped overseas. The growth of the service sector means that there are now many non-manual employment opportunities associated with middle class culture and identity. Changing educational opportunities which encourage the continuation of education up to 18 years and the self-funding of university education through the student loan system. Social changes, more freedom and individualism, and less pressure to follow in parents' footsteps. So there's now more freedom for people to actually make a choice rather than feel constrained by the family. So there's a few studies on the working class which support either some of the changes or actually argue that the working class haven't actually changed. So Skegg studied the lives of a group of 12 working class women who had all enrolled on courses in the caring professions at a local further education college in Midlands. Her research showed how the women tried to distance themselves from traditional working class norms and values. The women wanted to be seen as respectable, and by having careers, owning their own homes and dressing in an appropriate way, they tried to dissociate themselves from other working class women. Oops. Savage carried out 50 in-depth interviews with people who lived in Cheadle in Manchester. They found a strong culture of manual labour. They argued that the whole area was based around manual labour. Men were employed in physical or manual jobs. Half the men interviewed belonged to a local social club, which formed the basis of their social life and leisure activities, showing a culture of neighbouring. So this supports the idea that the working class still have a sense of community, and the elements of the traditional working class are still around today. The women in their study organised their social lives around local families or contacts in the area, which suggests the existence of social capital in the area. However, most of the interviewees did not work locally and had to travel to work. Many were homeowners, owned their own cars, and had access to consumer goods. In terms of class identity, only 21% had a clear and definite view of a class that they fitted into. 41% said they had no clear social class, and 40% viewed themselves as working class. So this study can actually support the postmodernist view, in that people didn't realise they had a class identity. So you could argue that class identity is blurring. It can also be used to actually show how the working class have changed. And thirdly, it can actually be used to support the idea that the working class are still distinct and that there are still elements of the traditional working class around today. So we're now looking at the middle class. We've already looked at certain aspects of middle class identity when we've looked at Bourdieu, because Bourdieu argues that the middle class have three types of capital: economic capital, social capital, and cultural capital. The higher class you are, the more social, economic, and cultural capital you have. So traditionally, middle classes were associated with professions such as doctors, solicitors, and teachers. These occupations indicate a high level of educational achievement, the existence of cultural capital, and an exclusive professional status, which meant that they required extensive professional training. Traditionally, middle class culture was based on white-collar or non-manual jobs, or professional jobs in managerial roles. High levels of social mobility, with the middle classes aspiring to be more successful and moving up the social class ladder. Strong networks and connections to people in other middle class professions. Deferred gratification. The middle classes believed that if they saved hard in the early stages of their careers, they would reap the benefits later. So they were more likely to put off pleasure in order to gain more pleasure in the future. So more likely to save the money and more likely to go to university. Middle class was also characterised by educational achievement and a university education, owning homes in desirable places, and cultural capital, foreign holidays, and an appreciation of high culture. However, the distinction between the working class and the middle class has blurred. It is no longer easy to see a dividing line between the cultures or the two groups. It has become increasingly meaningless to talk about a division between the working class and the middle class, being those who had non-manual jobs and those who have manual jobs. The rise in white-collar occupations and the call centre culture has meant a huge change in the nature of employment, with the expansion of administrative office-based jobs. These may fit comfortably with the middle-class culture, yet economically they have more in common with the working class. As opportunities for further education increase and as incomes rise for many people in the UK, organisations such as the NHS and other government bodies grow in number. It is the case that the middle class has become split and fragmented into different groups. This does not necessarily support the postmodernist argument that class is disappearing. It could just be argued that class is growing more complex. So there are two studies which look at the middle class. Wynne studied a middle-class housing estate in Cheshire and found that the residents of Heathtown possessed economic, cultural and social capital. His work shows a middle-class culture very different from the working class and manual culture that Savage found in Cheadle. So there were differences between the middle class and the working class. In another study, Devine et al. Carried out 50 in-depth interviews with a sample of doctors and teachers in Manchester. Both of these professions would be considered as middle class, yet most of the sample did not refer to the concept of social class in their interviews. Devine suggested that they felt uneasy about the label of class as they feared being perceived as superior to others. The research suggests that the concept of social class in the UK is associated with status positions and is an exclusive label, one that seeks to keep membership of higher social classes distinctive and something to strive for in life. This may explain why class identity is changing, as some people strive to achieve the exclusive status of being upper class. So this leads us now to look at upper class and identity. So again, the upper class have changed. When we look at the traditional upper class, we look at a small group who traditionally were based around having possession of social and economic capital. The upper class have been described as being socially closed, meaning that those that belong to it are not keen on allowing outsiders a view of their lifestyle, and this makes them difficult to research from a sociological angle, because the upper class are actually hard to get into. So the traditional upper class is made up of largely the aristocracy, who have been born into their wealth and titles. These are rich families who own vast estates and make most of their money from owning land. They are associated with intermarriage, that is, with marrying people from similar social backgrounds. This often increases their social capital, as families become related and networks expand. They value tradition, hierarchy and order, keeping the past and national heritage of their country special, which means they have cultural capital. The traditional upper class have economic capital in the form of property and wealth, although they don't necessarily show this wealth in the way that the super rich do. The super rich are the new upper class, which we'll be examining in a minute. The next part of the screencast will finish by looking at the super rich